somebody here wants this lady to suffer for the rest of eternity.
We may have a crime here, but we've got no body.
Certainly a puzzle, and possibly suggests something a little sinister.
There's so many suspicious elements to this story, it's really giving me cause for concern.
It would just be a world of pain.
Mummification, the preservation of dead bodies, became more than a science in ancient Egypt. It developed into a sacred ritual. No other people in history devoted so much time and expense to ensuring a safe passage into the eternal afterlife with their body intact. The skill of Egypt's master embalmers was phenomenal. Thousands of years ago, they worked to halt the ravages of time on lifeless corpses. Today, forensic technology can unlock that person's secrets to reveal the intimate story of their life and death. Over 2,000 miles from Egypt, in a museum in the north of England, lies the beautifully preserved coffin of an Egyptian mummy. But the body inside remains a mystery. The workmanship and sophistication of this coffin suggest that it would have taken weeks, if not months, to create. To be worthy of this top-of-the-range casket, its owner must surely have been a VIP. Dr. Joann Fletcher is a renowned Egyptologist who's done excavation work and mummy investigations around the world. She's been called in to try and unlock the secrets of this hidden mummy.
It came into this country a couple of hundred years ago, and rather than going to the British Museum or another major institution, it came up here to Newcastle.
Well, it's obviously an Egyptian mummy covering. It's obviously female from the exterior at least. So I'd be quite interested to sort of try and find out more about this individual inside. So I'm really looking forward to sort of seeing the mummy.
I'm afraid we can't do that. We really can't open this up because we're worried about damaging this beautiful object.
So is she completely sealed?
Yes, she is.
There's no small openings that we could take any samples or anything, no?
It's completely sealed.
Yeah, it's good. This is going to be quite a challenge, I think. First and foremost, what I'd really like to do is take a series of photographs from every angle, pretty much, so I can then go back to talk with the team in York and try and plan some sort of strategy, see what techniques we can bring to bear to study this, this very enigmatic and fascinating mummy.
This sealed coffin may be an exquisite work of art, but it's also an ancient mystery, thousands of years in the making. Joann's already nicknamed the hidden mummy the Lady. And piece by piece, she and the team will have to fill in all the details of who she was, where she's from, and how she met her end. This case will be a massive challenge for the mummy investigation team, given the coffin is sealed and they will never be able to see or touch the mummy within. The team are among the best in their field, but even for them, the task would probably be impossible, except for one thing. 2 years ago, for conservation purposes, the museum had the mummy CT scanned. Computed axial tomography is an advanced form of the conventional X-ray. Instead of revealing the outline of bones and organs, the CT scan forms a full three-dimensional computer model of the human body. This medical blueprint of the lady will allow the team to analyse specific areas of the body in great detail. The forensic data will be a priceless tool for the team as they try to uncover how this woman lived and how she died. Dr. Stephen Buckley has an international reputation for his chemical analysis of mummified bodies. His unique experience may unlock a vital clue on this mysterious coffin.
Well, from the chemistry, it's certainly possible that some sort of concealment was going on.
Egyptologist Jill Scott's specialist knowledge in ancient human remains will be crucial in unravelling the real story of how this mummy died.
Injuries like that I would expect to be lower down. It is very high up.
And Duncan Lees, who offers forensic support to criminal investigations all over the UK, is going to bring modern detective techniques to the case of this Egyptian mummy.
Just because they're 3,000 years old doesn't mean that we can't apply modern forensics and come up with good answers.
The lady, like every case, begins with a team briefing here in the incident room at the University of York. Joann begins with the bad news.
We aren't allowed to take this covering off. We aren't allowed to do any physical sampling with this. There is no way into this mummy.
The team gets straight into analysing the CT scan data.
What interests me here is this sort of package, which I'm guessing is part of the embalming process, the mummification, internal organs wrapped in there.
But there is a lot that we can do. I mean, using technology that Stephen will be applying as well, that looks through the coffin, looks into the interior, and builds up still three-dimensional information that will be a good starting point for us to create a virtual reality person.
The whole premise with this one is it's a completely, hands-off zone. We're not allowed to touch. But using this technology to penetrate through the wrappings, through the coffin, we can hopefully then, really bring this woman back to life.
The team have state-of-the-art forensic technology like a CT scan at their disposal. But if they're going to unlock the secrets of this sealed coffin, they'll have to do so with absolutely no access to the body within. To get things started, they're going back to basics. Jill Scott is hard at work. She's already unearthed the museum's acquisition records and has discovered that back in the 1820s, when the coffin of this mummy first came into the country, it was opened at the base by the feet. The damage that was done during this operation is one reason why the museum insists the coffin must now remain sealed. Further analysis of the records reveals details that will help them build a profile of the mummy.
And what we appear to have is a mummy dating from the 21st, 22nd dynasty. So we're looking around 1070 to 900 BC as a sort of rough date there.
The records state that the name of this mummy is Bakht Hornat, which means servant of Horus the Strong, which makes sense as a name for an Egyptian female.
And what we also have is a location. We have it mentioned here that she was found in a tomb at Gurna in Thebes, which is a really interesting place.
Set along both sides of the River Nile, near the modern city of Luxor, lies the ancient city of Thebes. It was for a while prominent as a royal residence, the capital city, and the religious heart of Egypt. It contained the necropolis in the Valley of the Kings and numerous funerary temples such as the Ramesseum, built by Ramesses II. But for all its architectural splendour, Thebes was at the centre of a bitter rivalry that had split ancient Egypt in two.
The south around Thebes is entirely controlled by the priests. So you've got these elite priest kings, these powerful, powerful dynasts that control the whole area. So whoever Our Lady was, she was very much under the thumb of these priests, both on a religious and, I'd say, a political level.
And I think the thing that interests me most of all is this Mona Lisa type smile to her, really enigmatic, and it kind of makes you wonder what's actually going on underneath this coffin lay. You know, what is she hiding?
In order to find out more about the lady, the team need to establish what she looked like in life. But with her body sealed in a coffin, this won't be easy. They've brought in an expert in cranial facial identification. Steph Davy-Jow uses her expertise on criminal investigations and archaeological cases. Taking the data from the CT scan, her computerized reconstruction model will reveal this woman's face for the first time in thousands of years.
This is a virtual 3D model of her skull. Rather than showing you how she would have looked now, I can show you what she would have looked like at the end of her life.
Steph has identified a number of changes to the woman's facial structure caused by the process of mummification.
Her jaw had been rotated into an open position.
Okay.
And her nasal bones had been broken, likely when they removed her brain.
Okay.
So I rotated the mandible back into its natural position. And I've taken the nasal bones, a bit like pieces of a puzzle. I was able to rotate them back into where they would have been.
Using standard tissue depth markers, Steph is able to accurately recreate the thickness of the skin all over the mummy's face.
The next stage of the process is to add eyes. These are obviously quite important to the final appearance of the face.
All the pieces are beginning to click into place as the face of the mummy is slowly building.
So I've begun to add skin. Essentially, I've built a grid using the tissue depths and the muscles to build the outer features of the face.
Is this a generic sort of mesh that you've attached to the head, or does this built up as a sort of bespoke data set for this individual?
I make it bespoke each time, especially in regions such as the eyes and the lips. It's very personal to the skull beneath.
With the face almost complete, Steph starts to add the finishing touches.
Here's an image rendered of what she looks like without hair.
Okay.
Quite statuesque, I think.
Incredible. Very, well, beautiful and very striking as well. Very strong features.
To build an accurate picture of her hairstyle, Steph has modelled it on the painting of the lady's hair on the outside of the coffin.
And there she is.
That is extraordinary.
This is how she would have appeared on the day that she died. The face of a 3,000-year-old mummy.
The ability to accurately rebuild the face of this Egyptian woman as it was the day she died almost 3,000 years ago is an astonishing achievement for the mummy investigation team. Especially as they've managed to do it without even opening the coffin.
Now that you've finished the reconstruction and spent so long working on it, what clues are hidden away in her face that you've managed to draw out?
Well, you can see she was a quite striking-looking woman. And you can see here she's got quite an extensive overbite. And based on her overbite, we can say with some confidence that she was likely of high status. This has been shown in various research outputs.
An overbite is the vertical overlapping of the upper teeth over the lower teeth. It's a classic facial feature of Egyptian royalty. A physical characteristic dating back to the lineage of pharaohs like Tutankhamun in the 18th dynasty. This important discovery backs up the theory that the mummy was a high-status Egyptian female. The mummy investigation team are among the first people to lay eyes on the lady's facial features in almost 3 millennia. Using museum records, the team has also confirmed her position at the top of Egyptian society, probably originating from the city of Thebes during the 21st to 22nd dynasty. But they are still no closer to working out exactly who she was or how she died. Joann is hoping that the hieroglyphs on the coffin could provide a vital lead. This ancient writing system contains a combination of symbols and alphabetic elements. Hieroglyphs were an essential component of mummification, as all Egyptian coffins had to correctly display the name of the person inside to ensure a safe passage into the afterlife. They were first deciphered in 1822 by French scholar Jean-François Champollion, who realized that the Rosetta Stone was inscribed with the same text in both Greek and hieroglyphs, an event that gave birth to the science of Egyptology. Alan Fildes specializes in deciphering this ancient Egyptian writing, and his knowledge could unlock the secrets of this sealed coffin. In his analysis of the hieroglyphs, Alan has noticed a series of anomalies. Ever since she was brought to Britain, she's been known as Bacht Hornacht, which means servant of Horus the Strong. But that's not what is actually written on the coffin.
So we've got Bar Ke.
Yeah.
Then we've got a very hurried water sign.
It is hurried, isn't it?
Very hurried.
They've not done a zigzag like normal.
Which I'm sure would have been as easy enough to write the water sign as it is to do that line. So we have Baket and Hor,
which translates as simply servant of Horus.
Then I see Nacht, Baket and Hor, Nacht.
The word Nacht, meaning strong, is separated from Bacht and Hor by the equivalent of a full stop. This means the name actually reads as Bacht and Hor full stop. Adding a Nacht seems to be a mistake by whoever transcribed it for the museum. For over 200 years, this mummy has been given the wrong name, servant of Horus the Strong, instead of her true name, servant of Horus. Remembering the names of the dead was sacred to ancient Egyptians. They probably valued the afterlife more than any other culture in history. They believed that death was simply a temporary interruption and that eternal life could be ensured by preservation of the physical form through mummification. The pharaohs in particular were so obsessed with the afterlife that they ordered the construction of vast and complex tombs to protect their bodies for this journey into the next world. The 19th century mistranslation of the name is one thing, but the original scribe also seems to have made a mistake.
Everything else is
That's
actually
just it.
spot on.
Everything
It's well
else
done.
does work.
And then we come to the major part of the inscription, and suddenly we send the wrong person. So we can't say with any certainty the name of this lady.
Exactly.
Which means
She can't live again.
She can't.
The description of the lady's status, a vital insignia for the afterlife, contains what must be a deliberate error.
This woman is called Lord of the House.
Absolutely.
And she's a lady of the house.
Yep.
She's not a man, she's a woman. So at the top, they've got the sex wrong, which is pretty
It's
fundamental.
maximum to hurt, isn't it? It's the maximum kind of thing you can do to this lady to affect her.
Yeah, it was totally misrepresenting
Yes.
what she was in life.
A gut instinct would be that that somebody didn't want this person to live in the next world. That an error so obvious as that, somebody wanted to do mischief. A thing so crucial as a name, a thing that was going to take you and allow you into the next world, a thing that you couldn't live without. No, it's a major error, or has it been done for a reason?
The deliberate misrepresentation of the mummy's title has thrown the case wide open, leading Joann and Alan to consider who would have wanted to sabotage the lady's passage into the afterlife.
Well, there are a number of suspects, aren't there? So if we list the subjects, we can actually have a look at them. There's the family,
Yeah.
there's the scribes, and there's the priesthood. Could have been any of the three. Let's face it, what percent of Egyptians could read and write in this period?
Exactly,
Maybe
I mean,
2 or 5, 1%.
1%
So a
max.
scribe could get away with that
Yes.
without 98% of people even
Well,
looking
who'd
at it.
know? Who would know what the scribe had written? That begs the question, what's going on inside this cartonnage?
Absolutely.
Symbolic damage was done to the inscription on the lady's coffin. The team now needs to establish whether any physical harm was done to her body. Since they will never see inside the coffin, Duncan has decided to use the images from the CT scan to create a precise model of the mummy's head. Facial reconstruction established what this woman looked like while alive. Now he wants to know what she looks like today, sealed inside her coffin. 3D design specialist David Moore will take data from the CT scan to form a replica model of the mummy's head. Commonly known as rapid prototyping, this state-of-the-art technique will allow the team to turn the digital data into a 3D physical reality.
We have a fundamental problem with this body, David, in that we can't actually see her. We've got this CAT scan data, but we really need a visualization. We really need to sort of look her in the eye if we're going to solve the case.
Well, see, the problem we've got here is 3,000-year-old mummy is a lot of those tissues have sort of absorbed into each other and become attached to the skull and things like that. So what we're really going to have to do is push the boundaries of the software slightly and try and really pick out just the material that we want.
Three-dimensional printers build up the specific design by printing thousands of successive layers. The model is then created by alternating layers of glue and chalk powder. The 3D result is a dimensionally accurate head based on the source data from the CT scan.
If you're observing a real mummy, you have to be so delicate, you know, contamination, everything that goes with that. What you've got here is an exact representation of what's lying within the casket, yet you don't have to be delicate with it. You can slice it in half, see what's inside. In a way, you haven't actually got a body here, you're looking at data.
Continuing to build the profile of the lady, Joann Fletcher is trying to gain clues from one of the oldest forms of forensic ID that exists: teeth. Dr. Ian MacLeod is a leading dental radiologist who specializes in the analysis of Egyptian mummies.
One of the things we can see straight away, she's got a full set of teeth, including, importantly, her wisdom teeth, the third molars. And in most people, the third molar erupts in your mouth at around the age of about 18. And it takes another sort of 3 years for the roots to completely form. So if we look carefully, we can see these roots are fully formed. Yeah. So automatically we can say this lady's over the age of 21. But if we look at this lady's teeth, you can see that this is the first molar. This erupts around the age of 6. The second molar erupts around the age of 12. And as we've said, the third molar about 18. Once the teeth are in the mouth, they start to wear, and in ancient Egypt, in fact, they probably wore their teeth quite rapidly. And if we look at the top of the teeth there, we can see that's worn quite a lot. This is a little less worn, and this one's worn, but not to a huge degree. So putting these sort of facts together, in fact, it gives us an age of around 30 at death.
Life was hard for most people living in ancient Egypt, and the average life expectancy was low. A woman in her mid-40s would be considered elderly. So the fact that the lady was around 30 years old when she died makes it unlikely that she died of old age. Meanwhile, the 3D visualization of the mummy is almost ready. Without even laying a finger on the coffin, Duncan is about to see exactly what the lady's head looks like.
The model's fantastic, isn't it? This is one-to-one scale data, so you're not reduced or changed in any way the dimensions. So she has a very delicate, small head, doesn't she? It's incredible to be looking into her face. I wonder who the last person she was looking at was.
Thousands of years after her death, the mummy investigation team are trying to piece together how and why this Egyptian woman died. So far, they know her name, her date of origin, and where she lived. And even though she remains sealed in a coffin, the team now has an extraordinary image of what the lady once looked like. They're now reconvening to try to work out their next step.
What we have isn't just a confusion with the name. There's certainly confusion with this woman's job title, the job description. We've got clear evidence of misspelling because these signs should read Nebet Pair, which means lady of the house.
Right.
And quite categorically, that's not what it says. When you look carefully, they've purposefully missed out the feminine T sign. So
they're basically calling her a him.
Exactly. And this is categorically wrong. And that's completely contradicting the ancient Egyptian belief systems.
So we've had a good step forward as well with the data from the cloud mapping, from the point cloud data that we derived from the CT scan. And this is going to be the only chance I think we get to look at her in real life. And here she is.
Stephen is a world authority on mummification techniques. He immediately notices a glaring discrepancy.
What concerns me and I notice is the difference between the fine decorated cartonnage and the state of the face. You see the sort of undulation here.
It's almost like it's blistered or something, isn't it?
Egyptian embalmers were highly sophisticated chemists who developed their art over thousands of years. A good embalmer would have preserved facial features to an incredibly high standard. But the 3D model has revealed the opposite.
It's certainly not what you'd expect of a decent embalmer at this time. There is definitely an inconsistency here, right? And I think that's something that needs looking at. Where I would go now with this is to look at the body and to see whether you see it there.
Sure.
The evidence for foul play is building up. The team now need to find a cause of death for the lady. Using a printout of the CT scan, Duncan is consulting Surgeon Commander Mike Edwards, who serves with the British forces. He's seen practically every kind of injury to the human body. Armed with the CT scan data, he may be able to tell what has happened to the lady's body. After careful analysis, Mike is able to answer the question that has remained unknown for 3,000 years: how this woman died.
If we look on the CT scan here, we can see that there is a massive incision or stab wound, whatever you want to call it. It is major, and it's not regular at all. It's ragged and irregular, and it extends very deeply.
We're not talking about the mummification wound, the embalmer's incision here.
No, we're not, because this is more likely to be the embalming incision, because it's in the left loin and left hypochondrial region.
Which is more normal, isn't it?
And it's very neat.
Yeah.
The large wound identified is completely separate from the standard embalming incision, which is also visible on the CT scan. This presents the team with a dramatic development.
I suspect the wound is here.
Okay.
And this extends, if a knife were placed through the abdomen, it would have gone through this small bowel here, large bowel here, maybe even into the liver here, and the large vessels at the back of the abdomen.
Why do we think this is a wound from a stabbing rather than, say, damage from impaling yourself or falling on something, you know, that sort of thing?
Well, I think I'll go further than that. I think this is an assassination. I think the site of the wound tells us, and the size of the wound. If we're imagining that I'm attacking you from the front,
yeah.
And if I'm coming in and I'm trying to stab you here,
there'd be
your
blocks
hands are going to be all over the place. I'm going to be stabbing you here, here, and here.
And certainly not up and under.
Certainly not up and under, and there's liable to be cuts on the arms, and
which we don't see.
Which we don't see.
Right.
We see a large irregular wound in the right hypochondrial region. Our assassin would approach from behind.
Right.
I step from the rear, hand over the mouth, hand goes up, I twist my body in, knife rams up, then spinning it around and moving it around as much as possible to do the maximum amount of damage before pulling the blade out and making a run for it.
The violence of the stab wound would have caused extreme trauma to the liver, leaving the lady in unbearable pain.
The reason it'll be so nasty with the liver is it's an incredibly vascular organ. It's got so many blood vessels going through it to do the job that it does in the body. Now, here's our weapon. Now, you can imagine that if this is penetrating through the abdominal wall, goes up into the liver and lacerates here, and he gruddles it around, and he does as much damage as he possibly can. And you can see just how vascular this liver is, and all these little bile ducts here and blood vessels. This would have been pumping out blood, you know, at the rate of knots.
Incredibly messy then. I mean, a lot of obvious signs.
A lot of blood and guts. The guts would have been prolapsing out the wound. There had been an enormous amount of blood.
So we have this graphic evidence for this vicious and violent and terminal assault on this 30-year-old woman. How long would it have been before she died? What would have been that sequence, do you think?
I would think it would just have been a matter of minutes. If the knife had penetrated even deeper and maybe taken out the major vessels, the back death would have been, you know, in under a minute.
Through her mind must have been passing all of that family and relations and what's happened and why has it happened and just amazing fear.
I would think it would just be a world of pain.
With the shocking revelation that this mummy was violently murdered, the team now need to work out why someone would have wanted to kill the lady. In a search for more clues, Joann and Jill are trawling through the Egyptian archives at the Literary and Philosophical Society Library in Newcastle. It has an extensive historical collection of books, periodicals and newspaper reports charting the birth of Egyptology as a science in the early 19th century. The Society hosted a public exhibition of the mummy when it first arrived in the country almost 200 years ago in 1821.
All right.
Oh,
what you got there.
Oh, lots of treats for us to look at.
Excellent.
I've come across this one, which actually looked quite interesting. It's the reports, papers and catalogues of the Literary and Philosophical Society from Newcastle upon Tyne, 1820 to 1821, so that's coinciding with our date. But if we have a look through, it's quite a strange book in its nature. It's more like a scrapbook, actually, and I think if we just have a sort through...
Oh, yeah.
It's all...
handwriting.
Yeah. Very beautiful handwriting, but then you've got small articles.
Like newspaper clippings.
Like newspaper clippings.
But the book contains more than just newspaper articles. It's about to reveal a very big clue.
Okay, well, that's interesting.
A specimen of the cloth and cord taken from the mummy at the Literary and Philosophical Society, Newcastle on Tyne. I'll let you do the honours.
Oh, here we go. Very, very careful. What a result.
That's incredible.
Look at that. They have kept it in a book.
That's fabulous. That's
for over 200 years.
It's still very dusty.
It is, yeah, let's close it up.
That is, I've just breathed in back to our neck tank.
Nice.
What a discovery. You don't usually make archaeological discoveries in a library, do you?
From the start of the investigation, the team had no access to the mummy or interior of the coffin, so the finding of these linen samples is a huge breakthrough. Tiny fragments of the linen wrappings are cut off to be taken away for chemical analysis in Stephen's lab. The entire embalming process would take around 70 days and was performed by priests and embalmers who had a detailed knowledge of the human anatomy. Some organs would be removed to avoid decay. The body cavity was then packed with linen and spices before the body was finally wrapped in many layers of linen cloth. It's these linen wrappings that Stephen is analysing for their chemical fingerprint. Through GCMS, gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, he will be able to identify the chemical compounds present on the linen sample. The technique works on the principle that every chemical turns to a gas at a specific temperature. By gradually heating the microscopic samples taken from the linen, it should reveal the many hundreds of compounds it contains by examining the point at which they turn to gas. This will provide a chemical fingerprint of each of the components used to embalm the mummy.
Well, I've never sampled from a book before, but it's looking quite interesting. And what we actually have is a ruminant fat mixed with castor oil, balsam, a trace of coniferous and a trace of beeswax.
Is that all?
Yes, that's all.
So nothing particularly exotic?
No, not really, no.
Well, surely you'd expect a few more exotic commodities, given the status of this woman. That sounds rather like a collection of somewhat mundane ingredients.
There does seem to be a contradiction here between the materials used and the quality of the cartonnage we see. So I suppose the question we should think about is why. But you see here the combustion markers, which we see if something has been very strongly heated. So it perhaps suggests that someone was in a rush rather than doing a good job.
The GCMS test has not only identified that relatively cheap materials were used in this embalming, but also that the materials used had been severely overheated. This correlates with the results from the three-dimensional print of the mummy's head, displaying large amounts of decomposition, also indicating an incompetent and rushed embalming. This is highly suspicious, as the mummification of members of Egyptian high society was a precise and delicate art.
No, it just doesn't add up. The way she was mummified, the ingredients aren't what one would expect, given her apparent status. So what's going on?
I'm not quite sure. And possibly suggest something a little sinister.
The results of the chemical analysis indicate that the violent stabbing of Bach den Hor was just the first of a series of heinous crimes to be committed against this Egyptian woman. Professor Don Brothwell has been conducting further analysis. He's a leading physical anthropologist who specializes in paleopathology and in analyzing anomalies in the human anatomy. Using the three-dimensional data from the CT scan, he's identified a shocking new development.
Well, I've been looking through this area of the head and neck. So if we get these CT scans and move through from the face back into the throat area there, first of all, you can see the tongue in the jaw. And as you move back towards the neck region, nothing then in the throat area. There's no windpipe or anything there at all. They've slit under the tongue, removed the windpipe and so on, cleaned it up, and then inserted a large wad of, I would think, linen or something of that sort of. I mean, my feeling is that that was a decision which they took for some carefully thought out reason. And it might have, in fact, infringed the usual policies in terms of embalming.
So you're saying this was a premeditated move?
A part of their technique.
Yeah, which is something I've never seen in any other mummy. The complete removal of this part of the body. Well, it wasn't a standard part of the procedure, was it?
Well, it is here.
Of all the human organs required after death, the throat was one of the most important for ancient Egyptians. According to their belief system, the deceased had to be able to speak his or her own name to the god Osiris, lord of the afterlife, to then be judged upon entry into the eternal paradise for the soul. In the eyes of ancient Egyptians, removal of the throat during mummification would prevent this sacred ritual from taking place.
Why take out the throat, the voice box, the very organs that are required, we know, to breathe again in the next world, to speak your name in the next world? Yeah. When she's there before the gods, she physically cannot speak her name before them. She can't identify herself. The cartonnage can't identify her. So it does give me some cause for concern, I think.
From the very beginning, this case of the sealed coffin looked almost impossible as the mummy investigation team were denied any kind of access to the body. Against all odds, and through a combination of forensic excellence and old-fashioned detective work, they've built an incredible picture of who this woman was and how she died.
Based on her overbite, we can say with some confidence that she was likely of high status.
Well, from the chemistry, it's certainly possible that some sort of concealment was going on.
I'll go further than that. I think this is an assassination.
There's the family, there's the scribes, and there's the priesthood. But it could have been any of the three.
Without even laying a finger on the body, the mummy investigation team has discovered that this woman was murdered by a savage knife attack to the abdomen. She was robbed of her life, and even worse in Egyptian eyes, robbed of her passage into the next world. This was sabotaged by a hurried embalming, the removal of her throat, and the incorrect inscription of her title on the coffin. She was murdered in real life and in the afterlife.
It's been very gratifying for me that we've actually been able to make this person live again in a physical sense when we've had absolutely no access to the body.
I think what was interesting for me was the chemistry, because it really pointed to a rush job.
For several centuries, she's been called backed whore nacked, when actually what she really was called is backed in whore. Merely saying that is to revive her soul.
One thing is clear. Someone with huge power and influence hated her so much.
She really did live in this world of pain for the awful few seconds before she passed away.
They killed her twice.
I know there's a fantastic story in there. You can just tell by looking.
You actually can't necessarily believe what you see.
And the forensic process is very much crossing things off a list.
It does really scream out, you know, violence.
Mummies, the preserved remains of people who lived long ago. Everyone knows that the Egyptians embalmed their dead, but for thousands of years, South American bodies were also mummified. Today, these mummies give us a unique insight into the mysterious world they inhabited, the way it was before the Europeans arrived. With newly developed scientific techniques, we can now unlock the world they once lived in, find out who they were, and often how they died. Burnley's Townley Hall Museum in northwest England. Mummy investigator Dr. Joann Fletcher is an Egyptologist, but her expertise covers mummies from around the globe.
Nice to meet you.
Hi,
Nice to
Mike.
meet you. Please come inside.
Excellent, thanks.
She's about to discover her latest challenge.
It came to us in 1913 and it was sent from Peru.
I must say I'm very much drawn immediately to the sort of shape of this extraordinary skull. It's really, really elongated.
The one thing that did interest us was this hole in the skull.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, look. It's not just circular, it's quite square, actually. This hole is quite extraordinary, very, very graphic. It's sort of, it does really scream out, you know, violence. It's quite awful. Is this maybe a cause of death?
The body was donated to the museum by W.T. Taylor, a Burnley engineer who'd been working on hydroelectric projects in South America.
Have we any idea whereabouts in Peru Taylor obtained it?
Well, we think it was North Peru, but we're not absolutely sure.
In his notes, Taylor describes the mummy as Chachapoya, a culture known as the Cloud People because they lived high up in the cloud forest, a remote part of the highlands of northern Peru. They were a warrior race, famed for burying their dead on perilous rock ledges high up on cliff faces.
What exactly are our parameters for this investigation?
Well, we're quite happy for the mummy to go back to York.
It's very rare to have such unrestricted access to a mummy of this kind.
I am very, very certain we'll be able to give you some good results on this, because, as you say, this was once an individual, a human being, and we owe it to them to find out all we can about its life and presumably its death.
York University's Mummy Investigation Team is a multidisciplinary group who've been pioneering new research into mummies for almost 10 years. Duncan Lees is the team's forensic archaeologist. He has the technology to make exact three-dimensional models of the mummies they study.
All I'm doing is creating millions, tens of millions of accurately surveyed points.
Jill Scott is an Egyptologist who also specialises in the study of ancient bodies. She's the main archive researcher on the project.
You don't only have that out of war wounds, trauma to the skull, you also have it through ritual means as well.
Stephen Buckley is an archaeological chemist. He has an international reputation for unlocking secrets hidden in ancient mummification techniques.
It's very much going into the unknown.
At this early stage of the investigation, the team already have an advantage. They can work on the actual mummy here at their base, and they've nicknamed him Cloud Man.
I am so excited about this mummy, and I'm sure you'll all agree it's a fantastic example of mummification. It's wonderful.
Mummies like Cloud Man can be preserved either by natural or artificial means. The accepted wisdom is that the vast majority of Peruvian mummies were naturally preserved, either by being dried in cool air or in hot, dry sand. Our team now has the tools to determine whether this body was also embalmed.
You're drawn, aren't you, immediately to an obviously unusual feature. I've never seen a skull like that. That is just such an extraordinary shape.
They think it's Chachapoya.
I know nothing about the Chachapoya people. I mean, you're talking about mountain regions. This is why he's called the Cloud Man. I mean, what do we know about them?
They are an incredible culture, really, because they were famed throughout ancient Peru for their warlike abilities. They were a pugilistic race.
So, as a Chachapoya, Cloud Man would have been one of a race of warriors who lived between 800 and 1470 AD. They were brutally suppressed by the Incas, who stopped at nothing to expand their territory. But even in the midst of battle, the Incas were said to admire the strength and stature of the Chachapoya.
We know that they were famous for being very tall.
Tall? That doesn't seem to fit with this, because even though he's very tightly bound and in this fetal position, the length of the individual limbs is not that great.
Are we looking at a young adult here?
Right, okay.
So it could be a younger member of society. So it's something to explore.
Stephen wants to get to the bottom of why Cloud Man's skin is so pale.
For me, I'd be interested to know whether there's actually anything on the skin, whether we've got it naturally preserved or whether there's something that's been applied that might be affecting the appearance.
There is an extraordinary amount of cord and binding on the mummy.
These ropes are something else. I mean, far too many to have been simply used to fasten the hands to the head and bind the legs up.
Cloud Man's hole in the head will also be a key area for investigation.
Is it the fatal wound? I really would like to get to the bottom of what that hole suggests in terms of this individual's life and his death.
Joann has another resource for the team to work with.
This is a fur-bound journal from W.T. Taylor, who was the person that actually brought the mummy back in the first place. Letters, photographs, notes and maps. I'd very much like you
I was going to say, I'd be really interested to have a look through this.
Besides having the book to work on, the team will also have to decipher the clues that remain on Cloud Man as they try to find out exactly who he was and how he died. This could be the most exciting case the team have ever taken on. Forensic archaeologist Duncan Lees has begun work building a virtual model of the mummy. He wants to stretch Cloud Man out of his fetal position using laser scans to give the team their first look at the whole body.
All I'm doing is creating millions, tens of millions of accurately surveyed points, accurately measured points across the surface. And the software allows you to look at that.
The laser sends out a beam onto the mummy, and by constantly measuring the way it bounces back, it's able to produce an incredibly accurate three-dimensional model.
On this mummy, you've got this sort of pale white matte finish, and so every single nuance, every single ripple within the tissue, all of the chords, all of the damage in this extraordinary shaped skull will show up really clearly. The absolutely beautiful data set.
The beam and receptor are so precise, the model they generate is accurate to within 20 microns. That's 20 millionths of a meter, less than the thickness of an eyelash. Once the 3D scan is complete, Duncan should be able to stretch the mummy out to see how tall he was and what sort of build he had in life. Historical researcher Jill Scott has been reading the journal that Burnley engineer W.T. Taylor brought back along with Cloudman from his travels in Peru. This should be able to paint a picture of where Cloudman came from and who he was.
There's loads of interesting stuff in here, but it's only sort of when you get towards the end that I'm finding any particular references that are useful to us for the investigation for this mummy.
Taylor left Burnley in 1910 and spent 3 years in Peru. Over that time, he kept this journal, which reveals a keen interest in mummies and Inca weaponry.
And then it actually talks about him finding this mummy as well and sort of what he had to do to get there. On the early morning, I, with 2 others, made preparations for entering the deep pit. On several parts of the passage, we encountered several petrified mummies, human skulls and human bones. As much as this guy details everything here, we don't really get any sort of concept of provenance, because all it mentioned was the fact that they've entered into mountains, down into a ravine, and that there's a hole which is about 40 feet deep. So that could be anywhere. We can't go to a map and pinpoint specifically and say that that is where that mummy was found.
Given the lack of a precise location, Jill is going to need a Peruvian expert to help establish Cloudman's place of origin. The investigation has already produced its first results. Duncan has animated the data from his laser scan.
Well, I've been working on the laser scan data. I've put it into this visualization package.
Yeah.
It means that we can take this sort of virtual tour of the mummy very quickly.
He's articulated the limbs of what he's pretty certain now is an adult, then taken account of any shrinkage over the centuries.
But you want to see something cool? We have done some work on it. So what we've done is taken the mummy and, as I said, broken it down into the component pieces of an articulated adult human. So the arms, the legs, the head and everything else. And what we've done is run this animation which shows the mummy moving from its fetal position into its standing position.
Oh, that's fabulous!
And looking at you at the end. We've got a definite height here now. We've got a 142, 1.42 metres, so just under 5 foot in height.
5 foot?
Yeah, well, yeah, not very big. You told me these are people famed for their pale skin, but also their height.
Their stature. They were noted for their height, for their stature. 5 foot?
Yeah, under 5 foot, actually. 1
so
metre
it's
42.
literally, what?
Yeah, if I'd brought a tape measure, I could show you, but certainly only up to your sort of shoulder height.
Oh.
The Chachapoya were known for being tall, so the revelation that Cloudman was only 142 centimetres cast doubt on Taylor's claim that he was Chachapoya. With his ethnic origin in question, the team looked to chemistry to find some concrete answers. Archaeological chemist Stephen Buckley specialises in the chemical analysis of mummies. Using pioneering techniques, he works with minute samples of the mummy to establish where it's from, how old it is, and how it came to be preserved. The method he uses is GCMS, gas chromatography mass spectrometry. This complex testing process can identify minute quantities of chemical compounds that have come into contact with the body. Stephen is also taking samples which he'll send off for carbon-14 analysis to establish a date for Cloudman. Peruvian mummies can be anything up to 7,000 years old, so this will be another crucial clue to Cloudman's identity. Based on the mummy's pale skin, Stephen has a hunch that Cloudman was artificially preserved, and if he can find evidence for this, it'll be groundbreaking.
Well, they're usually assumed to be naturally mummified, and looking at this, there's nothing to give us any clues. But what interests me is just to see whether the chemistry can actually provide any answers on that one.
Artificial mummification was extremely rare in ancient Peru and would certainly point to a high-status individual. Joann also wants Stephen to do paleodietary analysis to learn more about Cloudman from the food he ate, which, if he's from the mountains, should consist of high-altitude crops, traces of which can be found in hair, bone and body parts.
Now, I have to say, I've looked very closely and I can't see any evidence of hair or, in fact, fingernails or toenails, which is quite unusual for a South American mummy. So, if we wanted to undertake paleodietary analysis, for instance, how would we go about that?
Well, I think that could be a problem, but I suppose another option is perhaps to look for the, see whether the stomach or the intestines have survived and actually analyse the contents there.
Fortunately, the team has one of the world's leading paleopathologists on hand. Professor Don Brothwell combines his vast medical knowledge with a profound expertise in ancient remains. Stevens asked Don to cut into and sample what remains of Cloudman's internal organs to see if he can find out about diet and evidence of possible toxins in the body. But it's not an easy task.
There is so much decomposition, we will have to sample fairly extensively, and I'm pleased that we have permission to do that.
To find out where best to operate, Don conducts his initial examination with an endoscope, normally used for exploratory medical work.
Well, I've heard of rump steaks, but rump endoscopy is new to me.
Don is looking for the remains of the intestinal tract, which will give the best information about diet, possible toxins in the system, or infection.
There's some structures that are more complete, but it's extremely damaged and ragged inside.
Don will cut into what he's found of the mummy's soft tissue to obtain samples for Stephen to analyse. The trick is to distinguish between what is useful for the investigation and what is totally decayed matter.
It's just like old shoe leather in parts. That could be a part of the intestinal wall. What we need is a sort of mini Hoover to bring it out.
Yes, true.
They are also hoping to extract useful materials from Cloudman's head.
You going for brain?
Well, I'm going for what's left in terms of tissue, which may be brain. Well, there's fly pupae there, I think, as well.
As the team wait for the samples to be processed, they concentrate on establishing Cloudman's cultural context. Because ancient Peru is outside the team's direct area of expertise, Jill Scott is meeting Dr. Nicholas Saunders, an anthropologist specialising in pre-Columbian Peru, here at the Bankfield Museum, Halifax.
Take a look at this. Now, the striking thing that we've all noticed in our discussion is the cranial disfiguration. So, what can you tell us about that?
Yes, it looks weird to us, but in fact it was absolutely normal in ancient South America. Many civilizations deformed the cranial bones from birth. So we know that sometimes this was done for ethnic identity, tribal identity, and sometimes it was done as a sign of beauty, and it was also done in terms of a sign of social status.
The unnaturally long and pointed shape of Cloudman's head is clearly a result of cranial modification, examples of which have been found on skulls all over the world.
How did they do it?
Basically, they bound it with cloth and sometimes with wooden boards, back and front or on the side, depending on the exact shape they wanted.
Right.
But for them, it was an aesthetic ideal. It was a thing of beauty.
For a 2-year period starting shortly after birth, Cloudman would have had his head tightly bound whilst his skull was still malleable to shape it into this extraordinary form. The effort this procedure would have taken suggests Cloudman was definitely an elite member of his society. Working with the photographs, Nick has found other interesting clues to Cloudman's identity.
We know from ancient Peru that prisoners of war and maybe shamans who cast inappropriate spells were often tied by the rope, tied by the body, roping one person to another, and sometimes then were sacrificed. So there's an intriguing possibility that we can't prove at the moment that this individual might have been a prisoner of war.
Perhaps Cloudman, bound with so much rope, died in captivity. To explore this possibility and to pinpoint more about Cloudman's identity, Jill's hoping Nick will unlock the secrets in Taylor's diary. His first analysis reveals some disturbing discrepancies.
The conditions that he found these mummies in really relates to the coast, rather than up in the mountains and the cloud forest where they may have come from, but I don't think they did. Examples, for instance, would be he talks about going 40 feet down on a rope into a pit to find these mummies. If he was in Chachapoyas region, he'd have to be scaling a cliff for 100 feet in order to reach them.
The Chachapoya theory looks even more in doubt.
He talks that they're surrounded by sand and soil, which is clearly not going to be the case in Chachapoyas. And he also makes a reference similarly to the mud bricks that surround some of these mummies. Again, you find that all the time on the south coast where mud bricks are preserved. In the Chachapoyas, constant rainy area that it is, they wouldn't last 5 minutes.
Nick also points out that ancient Chachapoya territory was at least 200 miles away from Lima, where Taylor was based.
I think it's much more likely, in fact, that he probably went for a day or 2 days around the Lima area, maybe into the foothills of the Andes, and with a guide found and located these things and took them back. So not quite as heroic, I think, and so therefore definitely not Chachapoya.
This confirms the team's suspicions, first sparked when Duncan's scan revealed the mummy's short stature. From the description in Taylor's journal, it looks like his expeditions never even got close to Chachapoya territory.
I think what we're probably looking at is a small coastal culture, society, maybe around about 1000, 1200, 1300 AD. And it's the same kind of style of mummification that these people do along the coast.
This is the investigation's first major breakthrough. The evidence suggests that Cloudman is not Chachapoya, as they originally believed. He's probably from the coast, not the mountains, a totally different culture. This isn't the only development in the investigation. Stevens just had a major setback. None of the samples Don took have provided any dietary information. This means the team's drawn a complete blank on diet, which could have pinned down a location for Cloudman. But he does have other important new findings. The carbon-14 results are in, and a date has emerged for Cloudman. 1100 AD, right when anthropologist Nick Saunders suspected. This date places Cloudman firmly at a time when no single culture predominated in Peru. Instead, small warring tribes fought each other for territory in a power vacuum. And given Cloudman lived at such a violent time, the team need to test Nick's suggestion that the excessive rope bindings around Cloudman indicates that he was a prisoner of war who died in captivity. Duncan's been working with his laser images to separate out the rope from the rest of the body.
I know this looks a bit suspect, but there is method to the madness, I'm sure. The thing is that we've got some very good measurement data from the laser scanning now and looking at the photography. We've got a dimension for that rope length. We've got just over 2.5 metres of rope that we can measure. And there are areas that are occluded, areas that we can't see, that must add about another sort of 0.5 metre, maybe a bit more than that, onto the length.
Okay.
And it's all very well to look at that virtually. I think we need to get an idea of what that sort of length of rope looks like really, and how these bindings might work. I'd hoped that you'd help me with the binding side of things and we could see what was going on.
If these 3 metres of rope are enough for Duncan to tie up Jill, this could support the theory that Cloudman was a prisoner.
Right.
Okay, so we've got the knees and the hands were wrapped.
Okay.
You see, you've already got hardly any rope.
No, I mean, to me, this seems to be the sort of binding that would have kept the body in position in death. You know, literally to keep it
in
like
that
this.
fetal position.
Yeah, not for anything else to me.
Although 3 metres of rope did initially seem like the substantial amount needed to bind a prisoner, Duncan's experiment has ruled out Nick Saunders' theory that Cloudman was a bound captive. The team decide to refocus the investigation and find out what secrets the body itself might be hiding. They take Cloudman to be X-rayed. The X-ray highlights Cloudman's cranial modification beautifully, but can it reveal any evidence of age, injury, or battle scars? Armed with the images, Joann meets up with paleopathologist Don Brothwell to see what information he can derive from them.
And that one, of course, you've got.
The teeth aren't particularly worn. Third molars are there. I think it's probably a very young adult, but an adult rather than a teenager.
Joann wants to determine exactly what caused the hole in Cloudman's head.
I don't know, my initial thoughts, is it a war wound? So I was wondering if the sort of the nature of the hole might back that up.
One's immediate thought is it's ancient surgery. But the other possibility, of course, is, I mean, looking at it, you've got to think of other things. Infection can produce holes in the head. Tumours can produce holes in the head.
Joann is not convinced and wants to know more about battle injuries.
Would the sort of impact of maybe a slingshot, high-velocity slingshots on a skull such as this have resulted in the shape we can see here, do you think?
I doubt it, but we should certainly consider that as well. The thing is, if I hit you on the head with a hammer, then what you get is a sort of compressed fracture. Your skull collapses around the area where the hammer's impacting on your head. But you still get the bone there. And the only way you would get a hole is if, in fact, if your ancient surgeon then trims away the compressed bone. So,
would that be a possibility, though? Could we have somebody that was brought from the battlefield, and then these surgeons that we know were very sophisticated, then perform some sort of surgery on this individual?
A common form of cranial surgery in ancient Peru was trepanation, the surgical removal of a portion of the skull to relieve pressure from a wound or chronic pain.
It would be interesting to try and find out the various ways these surgeries could be performed. How can we go about trying to replicate how this was done? Because we really need to get to the bottom of what caused it. What do you think would be the best way to do it?
experimental work, don't you think?
So far, the team knows that Cloudman was a high-status young male from coastal Peru who died young in his early 20s. Now, to pin down the cause of death, they'll need to undertake 2 practical experiments. To test Don's preferred theory, they'll reproduce ancient head surgery. To put Joann's theory to the test, they'll need to simulate a battle injury. Ancient Peru was a violent place, full of warring cultures fighting terrible battles. They attacked each other with axes, maces, and slingshots, all common weapons. Peruvian expert Nick Saunders has a theory about which weapon might have caused Cloudman's injury, based on the size and the shape of the hole.
This is a slingshot. These things were used as slingshots, but they were also worn around the head. It should be worn into war and then taken off and then used, in fact, perhaps to cause a dreadful damage and wound in somebody else's head as well, which may be what we have in the mummy.
With a possible weapon established, the team's in a position to try to recreate the mummy's injury. The results might reveal what caused the mysterious hole in Cloudman's head. Lead investigator Joann Fletcher is at Flamborough Beach, North Yorkshire. She won't be satisfied until she's either confirmed or eliminated the possibility that the hole in the head is a war wound. Tom Richardson works at the Leeds Armoury and is an expert in ancient weapons technology. Joann set him the challenge of recreating the mummy's injury.
I sling at about 30 metres a second.
Well, that's not bad.
That's quite quick.
Yeah.
That's quicker than fast bowlers in cricket bowl at.
Yeah.
And of course they bounce the ball on the pitch before it hits the batsman.
So we're actually looking at something that could do a lot of damage. I mean, something going that quick. I mean, it's sort of, well, like an ancient version of a bullet from a gun, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's very difficult to sling in a non-lethal way.
To test the lethal power of a slingshot, they've brought along a pig's head to be the target. Joann also has a speed gun to determine just how fast Tom can sling at. They take their positions. If Tom can hit the pig's head with sufficient power, he could prove that a slingshot might have caused the mummy's injury.
Oh, 65.
Tom's getting readings of 65 miles an hour or 30 meters a second, but he's still way off target.
Of course, the problem with all this is accuracy.
Well, how would they have actually deployed these in ancient times?
Rather than having a single slinger sniping away, you have to think of a whole group of, say, 500 slingers raining stones down on a whole group of people.
So kind of like aerial bombardment?
Exactly so.
Finally, he's starting to home in on the pig's head.
Got it.
Although the slingshot hit the head at 65 miles an hour, it didn't even pierce the skin. Right now, Joann's battle injury theory is not looking very convincing. Meanwhile, forensic archaeologist Duncan Lees wants to explore how ancient surgery might have created the injury by trepanning a pig skull. Royal Navy Surgeon Commander Mike Edwards is particularly well qualified to conduct this procedure.
The last time I did anything closely approaching this was in a tent just outside Basra in 2003. I was called to operate on a Royal Marine who'd been hit by some shrapnel.
Right. Back in ancient Peru, people were also being trepanned for battle injuries.
One of the main reasons for doing it may well have been trauma.
Right.
It would usually be blunt trauma from clubs and slingshots, and the rate of skull fracture would be high.
So in essence, it's a sort of battlefield medicine. Okay.
But there would be also non-traumatic reasons for doing it. Say, for relief of epilepsy.
Okay.
If they had a brain tumour that was growing and they had increasing headaches, feeling might have been to let the evil spirits out.
People have been trepanned in countless cultures across the world since at least 7000 BC.
I think there are even modern extrapolations of this with lunatics that think they can reach heaven by opening their skull to the atmosphere.
It's quite likely that many of those trepanned in ancient Peru were also seeking spiritual awakening rather than relief from a head injury. For this experiment, Mike will be using a replica of an ancient surgical instrument, one that might have been used in 12th century Peru.
Talk me through the tools that you brought them, Mike.
Now this is an obsidian blade.
Okay, so that's volcanic glass.
Volcanic glass.
And it seems incredibly sharp down the edge here.
Oh, it is incredibly sharp, and I would say this would equate to something like a scalpel, which we have here.
Right, okay.
So we can see that, in fact, this may even be sharper than the scalpel.
Yeah.
If Cloudman's injury was caused by trepanation, this kind of obsidian blade is probably what they would have used to cut into his head. Mike wants to use this tool to see if he can recreate the same kind of hole in a pig's head.
I'm just going to hope that this is sharp enough. Oh, fantastic. Once we're through the first layer of skin, it does go through a lot easier. So it needs a bit of pressure. If I'd made this cut...
So if this was alive?
This would be bleeding like anything.
Okay.
I think it would be possible to lose about 4 pints of blood from a severe scalp laceration. It's absolutely amazing.
In ancient Peru, there's evidence that red-hot metal would have been used to sear the blood vessels and stem the bleeding.
I'm just going to make a cut here now.
If he didn't pass out from the pain, Cloudman would have been conscious throughout the operation.
I've scored in a circular way around here, you can see, and I've just gone through the outer table of the skull. I'm feeling I'm just getting to the inside, and my plan is to keep doing this until I get through the skull. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to go so deep that I go into the brain. This is just great. What a great tool. I don't think I could get such a good result even with a modern chisel or a scalpel.
After 45 minutes, Mike's close to penetrating the pig's skull.
This is going to come very soon.
I can see movement on the trepan piece there.
I think there is most definitely movement there, and if I just lift that away, oh, that is fantastic.
So we've got the trepan piece and then the hole in the brain underneath, but with no damage. It looks to me like it's all intact.
Using a Stone Age tool, Mike has managed to trepan a skull without even damaging the membrane surrounding the brain. The team has now explored what might have caused Cloudman's head injury in 2 ways. Before the results can be evaluated, the 2 damaged pig skulls need to be X-rayed. While Joann and Duncan have been experimenting with pigs' heads, Stephen's been working through the thousands of pages of chemical data generated by the samples he's taken from the mummy. To conclude the experiments, Joann returns to Don Brothwell to see if the X-ray evidence supports her theory that the hole was originally a war wound.
The surgery here, and then down here we've got the results of the slingshot.
I think your slingshot experiment, you might have damaged the skull just very superficially. Well, I think your experimental work here with trepanation is beautiful and convinces me actually that what you have here is trepanation without any doubt.
Don's conclusive. Trepanation caused the hole in Cloudman's head.
So was my day on the beach completely wasted?
Your day on the beach was lovely. I hope the weather was fine and you paddled, but as far as this is concerned, forget it.
Do you think this was successful surgery?
Oh, certainly, because on the X-ray you can see that there's a lot of healing around the hole.
So we can say this wasn't immediately fatal?
Oh, no.
And it wasn't the cause of death? No. So this individual lived... How long would you say?
Well, it's so well healed up that you can't really sort of predict how long, but he lived many months.
Cloudman survived his surgery, but given he died at such a young age, could having such major surgery have left him open to infection? Far from confirming cause of death, the team's experiments have only raised more questions. There are no clues as to why Cloudman was trepanned. Was it because he suffered from severe head pains or epilepsy? Or did he, as people have done throughout the centuries, open his head up voluntarily to be closer to his gods? Joann has called a team meeting.
If there's no cause of death, it's a question of where do we go from here, really.
I mean, I don't really share the pessimism because, I mean, the forensic process is very much crossing things off a list. You know, there are very few things that you can say for sure. There's a lot of things that you can cross off, and the work that we've done so far is crossing things off that list.
I know there's a fantastic story in there. You can just tell by looking at him. He's a fantastic mummy, and I so want to do this justice. So I think maybe I am sort of being a little despairing too early on. Yeah, pessimistic.
The science, there's so much more science still to do. So much that we haven't looked at, glaringly obvious things in front of us. I mean, there must be answers already coming out of the science that you're doing, Steve, as well. What sort of stage are we at with your stuff?
The mummy has been smoked.
Really?
So that was part of the mummification process?
Yeah.
This is a major revelation. Stephen's hunch was spot on. He's found out that the mummy's pale skin colour was produced artificially. The body was smoked as a method of preservation.
There's nicotine there with tobacco leaf, it would appear. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty earth-shattering, actually.
So mummified, certainly. A surprise perhaps, but
an unfair
a big
pessimism
surprise.
as well, I think. You know,
I know.
the scientists will come up with the right stuff.
Yeah.
Don't you worry.
That is fantastic news. This is really big, isn't it? I mean, that's sort of the first time I know of this definitely being found on a mummy.
Yeah, it's quite nice.
Well, that's the understatement of the year, isn't it?
Artificial mummification in Peru is virtually undocumented. This has to suggest that Cloudman was a member of the elite. Smoking the body would have helped to preserve it by keeping out insects. But obtaining the tobacco for this procedure would have been a massive task. It must have been one of the rarest and most precious commodities, since the nearest tobacco was grown in the Amazon basin at least 400 miles away. It would have required weeks of travelling to bring it back to Cloudman's coastal region. As the results come in, Stephen realises that he's on the verge of a major scientific discovery. He's found chemical substances which show that not only was Cloudman smoked, he was also embalmed.
On the head you have a plant wax, which is actually very characteristic and comes from Candelilla wax from Mexico. But in contrast, on the legs, you've got an insect wax, which is unusual.
Cloudman's legs were treated with insect wax, his body with a balsam tree resin, and his head with a plant wax, first and foremost as preservatives to prevent water and fungi from entering and destroying the body. But what makes Stephen's results so intriguing is that these substances weren't readily available in coastal Peru. The Candelilla wax found on the head was derived from a small shrub which is still used today in beauty products. It was sourced an amazing 2,000 miles away on another continent, Mexico in North America. Using these highly prized products on his body means Cloudman must have been an extremely important person. Such lavish attention suggests the equivalent of a state funeral.
If I was asked to speculate on who this individual might be, from the science, certainly, this is a high-status individual. He's been treated with substances coming from really long distances, so this would have been a very expensive process. So this is someone who had a great deal of wealth and status, and was someone quite special.
To understand what these substances symbolized in ancient Peruvian burial rituals, Stephen needs to consult a specialist. He sends his lab results to the team's Peruvian expert, Nick Saunders. Stephen's scientific discoveries are startling, but won't fully unlock the secret of Cloudman's role in life unless they're put into their proper cultural context. Stephen's faith has paid off. Anthropologist Nick Saunders has examined the chemical findings and emailed some astounding conclusions.
There's plenty to look at. One thing I notice is the recipe you describe is really a microcosm of the herbal world, each element representing a physical and symbolically important substance.
That's pretty good. Yes, look, it shows us that these ancient peoples had a philosophy of the body where different substances in varying combinations were regarded as symbolically appropriate for the head and legs. That's exactly right, isn't it? That's exactly what the science is telling us.
Yeah.
The embalming process clearly had huge symbolic significance. Each part of Cloudman was deliberately treated with a different substance. His head with plant wax, his body with tree resin, and his legs with insect wax.
The presence of insect wax on our mummy might indicate he could have been a shaman or a sorcerer who used these creatures for curing illness in life and was now in turn protected in death by their spiritual essence. Brilliant.
Yeah.
This is great. This is the hard science coming together with cultural history.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see the science making sense.
This is a huge breakthrough. The evidence suggests that Cloudman was a shaman, a tribal witch doctor who cast spells and communicated with the spirit world. Insects had a divine quality in ancient Peru as bringers of disease. They were also used in preventative medicine. It's possible a shaman would have consumed certain insects with psychedelic properties as part of his ritual communication with the gods. And there's more.
The nicotine in the body and mass may have been partly from the use of it during life, so if he was a shaman using this stuff, but also from the mummy's post-mortem ritual treatment deemed appropriate for a shaman. There are even tobacco shamans in Venezuela today. A tobacco shaman, what an amazing concept. That's fantastic.
It's excellent. I mean, I was sure of the science of the chemistry, but it's actually nice to see that this actually does make some sense.
Stephen's discoveries, both on tobacco smoking and Cloudman's chemical embalming, will reshape scientific opinion on South American mummies. After weeks of investigation, the team have finally established who Cloudman was in life. A shaman, a high-status and powerful religious figure. This was a man born around 1100 AD in the coastal region of Peru, close to where the capital city of Lima stands today. At birth, his head was bound into this extraordinary shape, like the other elite members of his society.
Sometimes it was done as a sign of beauty, and it was also done in terms of a sign of social status.
But Cloudman had a greater destiny than his contemporaries. He only lived to his early 20s.
I think it's probably a very young adult, but an adult rather than a teenager.
But in his short life, it seems he rose to be a shaman, a holy man with a direct link to the spirit world. And perhaps he was trepanned to open up his head to commune with his gods.
The feeling might have been to let the evil spirits out.
We'll never be sure how he died, but given the lack of other trauma on his body, it's likely he died from an illness or infection, possibly as a long-term side effect of his trepanning. At death, his high status was reflected in the extraordinary care with which his body was preserved, with waxes brought from thousands of miles away.
This would have been a very expensive process. So this is someone who had a great deal of wealth.
So we've gone from the Cloudman to tobacco shaman.
Thanks to the embalming skills of his community, he is not decayed like almost all his contemporaries. This expert and rare preservation has allowed the team to breathe life back into this individual and unravel the secrets sealed in his mummified body for almost 1,000 years.
I get the feeling that he's not met a happy and content and peaceful demise.
They had lots of harsh punishments. We have burning of the body, general mutilation of the body, and certainly beheading.
This kind of status of mummification, this standard, isn't given to just anyone.
Just because they're 3,000 years old doesn't mean that we can't apply modern forensics and come up with good answers.
If the man wasn't dead already, it certainly would have killed him.
Incredible force, incredible violence.
mummies, the preserved remains of the dead, are a unique window to the past. Cultures like the ancient Egyptians, convinced they'd need their bodies in the afterlife, went to extraordinary lengths to develop advanced embalming techniques to prevent the natural decay that occurs after death. Thousands of years on, science allows us to decode the secrets of these preserved bodies to reveal astounding details about the world these individuals lived in. The key facts about their lives, and for many, how they met their deaths. Over 2,000 miles from Egypt, in a museum in the north of England, lies a mummified head. No one knows how it came to be separated from its body. And with just a fragment of this individual to work on, the mummy investigation team is looking at a major challenge.
We don't know who he was, how old he was when he died. We don't know where the body has gone. We don't know why the head's just as it is. We've got so many questions that need to be answered.
But we know he's from Egypt then, I take it?
Yes, we do, yes.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much all.
Fair enough. So, I mean, we can say, looks like an adult male from Egypt. He's obviously being mummified. So you want us to do what we can to try and give you some answers?
Absolutely.
It has to be said, we are used to dealing with complete bodies, not just body parts. So we will have our work cut out with just the head, but I'm sure we'll be able to pin down some actual answers to sort of really put flesh on his bones and really put him into his sort of ancient context for you.
Team leader Dr. Joann Fletcher is a renowned Egyptologist. She's examined mummies all over the world, but this could be her toughest case ever.
First things first, I always like to undertake a thorough visual examination, have a good sort of face-to-face. The mummification levels are so superb. I mean, the quality of the preservation of the soft tissue. I mean, look at the profile, that nose is exquisite. Very rarely do you have that. Usually the nose is flattened to the face with the tightness of the linen wrappings. It's very poignant, in fact, because the expression is retained. So it's almost as if he's looking back at us.
This man could have died in 1,000 different ways, and with no body to work on, all the team's theories will have to be drawn from the head alone. Bit by bit, the mummy investigation team will try to fill in the elusive details of who this man once was, where he lived, and if possible, how he died. Each member of this well-established team brings a unique set of skills. Duncan Lees works with London's Metropolitan Police and MI5. He'll bring his very special forensic skills to bear on this ancient Egyptian.
We're very much a team. Different experience and expertise has to be combined.
Dr. Stephen Buckley is a pioneer in the chemical analysis of mummification. He is one of the very few people in the world able to identify some of the vital chemical clues hidden in this head.
The embalmers knew their stuff.
And Egyptologist Jill Scott's specialist knowledge of ancient human remains will be vital in trying to unravel the real story of how the mummy died.
In forensics, we need physical hardcore evidence.
The team is about to be briefed at their HQ in the historic city of York.
What they want to know is, who is this person, how did he die, and is there any evidence of foul play?
So the photos obviously clearly show just a head, and unless there is photos missing, that's all we've got. Is that the case?
What you see is what you get. This is it. It's just a head, and we're used to having complete bodies when we've done other mummy studies, but this is it. It's just the mummified head, so we're really going to have to work hard on this one to pull together all the expertise to try and come up with some answers.
I'm going to treat this in the same way that we treat modern cases. This a modern murder, even. Just because this person is of antiquity doesn't mean that the evidence won't be there for how he died.
The photographs prompt the team to ask plenty of questions.
Right on these awful neck injuries. I mean, something's gone on there. Was it an axe? Was it some sort of blade? Was it a garrote? How did this head, how was it removed from the body?
And is it linked to the wounds that we've got above the right eye socket?
Yeah.
I mean, was this individual decapitated really? Did he suffer trauma from stabbing or from battery, blunt objects, that kind of thing?
The first thing that I'm going to need to do is to go back to the archives and see what I can dig up on this person. It'll be interesting to find out when they actually came into the country and see if that's going to fit in with what the science is going to tell us about this person and the status and how they've lived.
So, yeah, exactly. If we can pinpoint him exactly where in Egypt and when exactly in Egypt, because that has a lot of bearing, the chronology, doesn't it?
That's right, and I think that the mummification can help the materials used change through time. So if we can identify these, getting a chemical fingerprint of these materials, we can get some idea of who this person was and something about status as well.
It's only now that we have the technology has come a long way and we're able to look at answering the questions. 2 years ago we wouldn't have been in a position to do this, but now we have a really good chance to bring technology to bear on a several thousand-year-old head and answer the questions about how this poor man died.
My main concern in this case that it is just a head, so we have to sort of be cautious that there's only so much that we're ever going to be able to find out.
Most of the evidence which could throw light on this man's life and maybe explain his death is missing, along with his body. So it's going to be a tough task to try to unravel this ancient mystery. Members of the mummy investigation team are combining the latest forensic techniques to try to determine exactly how this ancient Egyptian died. But even with all their technology, they're still hindered by the fact the body from the neck down is missing. Stephen is collecting skin samples from the head for a GCMS test. It's the first time the head has been subjected to chemical analysis since it was discovered. This will enable Stephen to identify individual chemical compounds used to embalm the head. And the compounds can answer questions about how the man was mummified.
It can pick up minute traces of a number of things, so we need to be very careful about the sampling side, so that what we don't pick up is modern contamination, for example.
His sampling also has to be carried out with precision, or he risks damaging the priceless mummy.
The mummification will provide quite a few clues as to who he was. The standard is excellent, and the materials that we find can certainly help us to put him in his proper place in history.
The equipment is so sensitive that it could detect 2 drops of blood in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Continuing to build the mummy's profile, analysis of his hair could add more information to the emerging picture. It can tell us about the quality of the man's diet, a strong indication of his social status.
What I'll be doing when I get back to the lab is to extract the organic materials, the organic residues from the samples. I've got to get a chemical fingerprint, and then of those individual components, put back together the materials employed, and that can really be very, very valuable in telling us about the life that this person was involved with.
Meanwhile, forensic archaeologist Duncan Lees is using a 3-dimensional laser scanner to build a virtual model of the mummy. The scan will create an exact digital version of the head, essential for the team's work.
What we're using is a laser scanner here to create a dimensionally accurate model that we can then investigate without touching the head itself. If we're going to start looking at any damage, any lesions, any fractures, any compression that we find, and perhaps trying to relink that to weapons or objects or anything else that become a sensible hypothesis for the cause of death, then that's much better done in a virtual environment.
The scanner uses the same echo principle as radar, but using laser light. The laser beam scans the surface of the subject, creating 20,000 precisely measured points every second. This incredibly detailed information is sent back to the computer, which generates a precise three-dimensional virtual model. It has phenomenal accuracy. The margin of error is just 20 microns, 20 millionths of a meter, less than the width of a human hair.
I get the feeling that he's not met a happy and content and peaceful demise, and we need to do him the service and, if you like, give him the justice of trying to find out to the best of our abilities how he died and put that on record. I think he's waited long enough for that.
Before the team can work out how the man died, they must first try to give him his life back by establishing who he was and where and when he lived. The head was donated to the Newcastle Museum in the late 19th century. One of the very few clues the museum was able to pass on to the team was the suggestion that the mummified head originated from the Old Kingdom period of ancient Egypt. This is around the 3rd millennium BC, over 4,000 years ago, when Egypt attained its first great peak of civilization. This was the time of the magnificent pyramids at Giza. At this stage in Egyptian history, mummification was relatively new and relied heavily on the use of natron salts, a simple mixture containing carbonate and bicarbonate of soda. When a body was packed in natron salts, moisture was drawn out of the skin in a vital part of the mummification process. With little else done to the body, Old Kingdom mummies are quite easily identifiable, as they tend to be poorly preserved. But in this case, with no body to work on, it's back to some traditional research work for Joann and Jill. They still need to find a way of working out where he came from and when.
I've been rummaging around in the archives and I've managed to come up with a bit of information on this guy. We know that he was donated in 1877 and was actually found in Egypt at the site of Saqqara.
Well, that's pretty good news, actually, because that places him geographically in northern Egypt, Memphis. That's fantastic. We've really sort of got an idea of provenance now.
The link to the burial site of Saqqara is a significant development, as this was the graveyard for the capital city, Memphis. It was where Egypt's rulers and elite were laid to rest.
Clearly there is an astonishingly high level of mummification going on here. It's not your standard stuff. It's really well done.
No, I do think certainly there is a very good chance that he would have been about royal duties in his everyday professional life, because this kind of status of mummification, this standard, isn't given to just anyone. This is really the creme de la creme, I think.
To have survived thousands of years with so much detail like the eyelids, ears and hair intact suggests that this man was mummified to a very high standard, far higher than anything achieved in the Old Kingdom.
I think looking at the mummification techniques, we're dealing with something certainly at least 1,000 years after that.
Right.
I think the mummification techniques at the moment are pointing towards a date 1200 to 1000 BC.
This revised date for the head's origin could be the first break in the case. The quality of mummification suggests the mummy dates from the later part of the New Kingdom, closer to around 1000 BC. The New Kingdom was the time of some of Egypt's most famous rulers, such as Tutankhamun and Ramesses II. Adjusting the head's date of origin by over 1000 years has huge implications. The results of the GCMS test could provide the definitive proof. Gas chromatography mass spectrometry is the gold standard of chemical analysis, crucial to criminal investigations. The machine works on the principle that every chemical turns to a gas at a particular temperature. By gradually heating the microscopic samples taken from the head, the test should reveal the hundreds of component compounds by examining the point at which they turn to gas. This will provide a chemical fingerprint of the substances used to embalm him.
What we've got with the material on the skin is a plant oil. Castor oil is one of the main ingredients. Conifer resin, but as a pitch, a strongly heated pitch.
Why strongly heated?
I think the rest of the chemistry is giving us clues, and I think in this case it may be to actually darken it, to blacken it. Because we also see bitumen in here, but it's only a minor component. But the fact that it's there at all is helpful.
The minute chemical components of bitumen, which Stephen has identified, are an important discovery. Black was the traditional colour of Egypt and also represented life. So the blackening of mummies during embalming may have been a way to display national identity. This development could redate the mummy to an even later period than Joann suspected.
The use of bitumen here excludes the New Kingdom as a possible source. It only really came into its own 700, 600 BC.
This result is a hard fact the team has been hoping for. Modern science has helped date the mummy to the late period, around 700 to 400 BC. It's about 2,000 years later than the museum's records suggested. The team have now established that this man almost certainly lived in the ancient Egyptian city of Memphis in the late period. This was the last great flowering of Egyptian culture, the final centuries of the glorious era of the pharaohs.
Egypt was very much trying to sort of establish its cultural identity, you know, with this onslaught of all these foreigners into its country.
At a time when the Egyptians were feeling that they had to reassert their own national identity. And we're doing it in a number of ways, including through the mummification.
But Stephen's scientific analysis yields even more results.
In the hair sample, which we can compare with the skin, we do actually see a very similar chemical fingerprint, a very similar pattern with the castor oil, the conifer pitch, and the balsam, and the bitumen. But what we also have is beeswax. It obviously wouldn't have been cheap.
So these mixtures wouldn't have been available to just anyone then?
No, they wouldn't.
The GCMS test has built a much clearer profile of our mystery man. It's told us where he lived and when, and amazingly, it has also identified exotic conifer and beeswax traces in his hair. Both these substances were used in the manufacture of wigs, a popular status symbol for members of Egyptian high society. Filippo Salamone has been researching the rituals and methods of ancient Egyptian hair and wig making for almost 10 years. Using techniques thousands of years old, Filippo has carefully reconstructed the kind of hairpiece a high-status Egyptian man, like this mummy, might have worn.
Phil, that's absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
One of the things that I did learn very, very quickly when making this wig was just how skilled they were. Probably more so than they are today, because everything was done obviously by hand and without the modern tools.
This intricate hairpiece has taken Filippo 4 months to create, and he's used one of the very substances discovered by Stephen in the mummy's hair.
The ancient Egyptians did attach each piece individually by the use of beeswax, by drawing the piece of hair along. Judging by the amount of time and effort and energy it's actually gone to creating this wig, I feel as though he would have been somebody of wealth.
What we have is the wig is a status item, because not only by wearing it to appear different to the vast majority of people in society at that time, you're also sending out the sort of signal that I have enough wealth at my disposal to have people make these things for me. And that does raise the sort of question. I mean, would he have been so well marked out in society to have him, made himself a target, perhaps? I mean, could he have been a victim of a random act of violence or even mugging?
Yes, I was going to say.
All these ideas come into your head because, you just can't help it when you look at this wig and you imagine him wearing it.
The investigation is gathering momentum. A picture is emerging of the man's life, status, and even appearance, but the team still has no idea how he died. Jill has returned to the Egyptian archives in Newcastle. She's looking for evidence of the practice of beheading in late-period ancient Egypt.
These are all images by Baron Dominique Vivant Denon, who was with Napoleon during his conquest of Egypt. And, he's gone around and he's drawn scenes that he's found in tombs and monuments. And we have some fantastic images of a man here holding a knife with a person beheaded. So his head's on the floor and he's bound to a post. Now, that is perfectly feasible for what's happened to our guy if you actually look at the wounds. So that's actually quite interesting. These have been taken from tombs and monuments, so we know that they do exist, and they definitely show people being beheaded whilst alive as some sort of punishment or ritual. We have all of this evidence here that is saying that it definitely went on in ancient times, which is really important.
So people were definitely beheaded at the time. But is that how this mummy lost his life? Joann has decided to consult a radiologist to investigate beheading as a cause of death. Dr. Ian MacLeod specialises in the analysis of Egyptian mummies.
I think if the head had been beheaded, as it were, I would have expected to see a cleaner cut, where an axe or a sword or something would have cut into the flesh. Well, what we've got here is a sort of more ragged sort of damage.
It's not clean at all.
It's not clean at all. It's almost as if it's snapped off.
Which would explain these kind of raggy areas.
Absolutely.
Is this muscle or?
It is partly muscle and the skin on the outside, absolutely right. And we can just see part of the bone poking through the inside of that. So it looks as if it's just snapped off at some time over the history.
So basically we can discount beheading as the cause of death?
I think it's highly unlikely this individual was beheaded.
I'm also very, very intrigued by this quite nasty wound over the right eye. And at first you think it must be a post-mortem wound, the soft tissues come away and so forth, but there's definitely damage to the bone. We know that one of the ways the ancient Egyptians, certainly the pharaohs, liked to execute enemies was to sort of use brute force and bring down a stone mace into their skull. And it often occurs around this area, around the brow area.
Well, it's difficult to say just looking at it, because, I mean, some of this could have been latter damage. I think what we really need to do to get more information is to get some X-rays.
So you think that's the next
I
step?
think that should be our next step.
This mummy did not suffer beheading. That line of inquiry is closed. But Dr. MacLeod's analysis has opened up another. The focus is now on the hole in the mummy's head. Could this be evidence of a fatal head wound? Harrogate Museum has a huge collection of Egyptian artifacts. Joann and Duncan are searching the building's storeroom for a potential murder weapon.
So basically what we're looking for is something like a mace head.
What exactly are mace heads? Are these a tool or a weapon? Or
These are really pretty brutal things when you look at them. And although a lot of Egyptologists see them and assume they're probably ceremonial or ritual because they are relatively small, I think that they could be used as some sort of really serious weapon here, because certainly in the art what you find are scenes of the pharaoh smiting the enemy. They've got the bound prisoner on his knees in front of the pharaoh, who's raising his hand with one of these in it, and he's about to sort of bring down the fatal death blow using one of these.
They are. I mean, they are very well made, aren't they? Beautifully finished.
Yeah.
I'm quite surprised at the different shapes and sizes of them.
Absolutely, absolutely. These are wonderful ones as well. These are, if anything, even more brutal than the globular ones. You've got such a sharp edge on that.
They'd cause a wound almost like a knife, wouldn't they? I mean,
Yeah.
it's a very fine cutting edge almost.
It's been finished beautifully. I'd love you to sort of scan one of these, because they are absolutely amazing. Well, the works of art, really. But to think that they could have sort of killed someone is something I'd love to find out.
Well, and the good thing is that if we measure them, if we scan them and then start looking at the comparisons with the wound itself in the skull and start to identify maybe what sort of shape and what sort of dimension we're looking for, we need to get some of those upstairs and then start recording them.
If we could sort of scan them all, that would be fantastic.
Like the actual mummy, the ceremonial mace heads are thousands of years old and just as priceless.
What we can do here is scan from above it, but also from underneath it, without having to move the object at all.
People have raised doubts. They have said these look too small to have done any damage. They must have been ceremonial, and we just want to answer that question one way or the other.
And we've been to a number of scenes of crimes where objects, you know, not much heavier than this and certainly not much bigger than this, have done awful injury to people.
The scan will give the team an accurate digital image of the mace heads. Duncan will then be able to compare the data with the digital dimensions of the hole in the head that he took at the start of the investigation.
Just because they're 3,000 years old doesn't mean that we can't apply modern forensics and come up with good answers. We're adapting techniques that have only been adopted in the last 2 or 3 years to get answers for things that happened thousands of years ago.
Despite having the latest in modern technology at their disposal, the mummy investigation team is so far no closer to unlocking the mystery of how the mummy died. Duncan is trying to digitally recreate how this man might have been killed, and Joann is planning to physically reproduce the same kind of brutal injury. She wants to see exactly the kind of damage a real mace can do to a real skull. She's commissioned stonemasons to reconstruct a pair of ancient Egyptian mace heads. They're working the granite with diamond-tipped blades to ensure an accurate finish. And Joann is on hand to ensure the modern techniques match the high standards of Egyptian craftsmanship.
Do you think this
Looks right.
I think it does. I think it's coming on really nicely.
You like to take the shampoo a bit further down?
Yeah, just like a millimetre, couple of millimetres maximum, just to get that nice curve coming along.
Ancient Egyptians wouldn't have had the luxury of power tools to fashion their maces. They would have had to rely on flint to shape the granite and then the coarse texture of sand to smooth it. And the entire process would have taken weeks, not hours.
So there we are. Just needs a final rub. It's a little bit bumpy. I mean, you can see already there I rubbed it a little bit with a diamond pattern. You can feel how smooth it gets.
Oh yeah, and that's pretty quick, isn't it?
Does it feel like?
It feels very, very tactile. It feels just like the ancient ones because, in effect, that's just what you've created.
Just put a handle in and you whack somebody.
Absolutely.
Back at the incident room, Duncan is ready to examine his virtual reconstruction of a mace attack.
What I've been putting together is the raw laser scanning data of the mace heads, and so we have the data from the mummy's head, and now with this we have a digital resource that is the mace heads as well. And I've been looking to see whether any of them are potential cause of death, whether the mace has been used to inflict the injury above the eye. I've ran through a number of hypotheses, and then I've animated the one that seems to suit best, and that is an attack from the front or from the side, rather than from around the back. When we digitally put them back on a shaft, they come out to be the sort of dimension that you get with a claw hammer. You've got a strong wooden shaft, and then a weighty, and in some cases, quite pointed object that would cause a huge amount of damage. I've seen the damage that objects like that can do to people, and it is definitely a potential cause of death. You would definitely be able to inflict the sort of wounds that we're seeing above the eye.
Right, so is there a particular one that you think is going to be more effective, or at least more likely to be related to the injury that we're looking at?
Certainly the ones that we looked at that were broadly in two categories. There were the ones with the ridge on, like you see here, and then there were the ones that were sort of more rounded and blunt. Both of equal weight, but I think that we're looking at the blunter one for the size of the impact, and also the more diffused shape to it.
Joann is going to attempt to match the damage on the mummy's skull to the replica weapon. If the skull damage matches, a mace could have been the murder weapon. Pigs' heads have a similar skin and muscle structure to humans. Although the bone is thicker, a mace will do similar damage to either skull. The pigs' heads will be struck by the two types of mace. Then they'll be x-rayed to see if the damage to the skulls matches images of the mummified head.
Basically, these are the two very distinct types of mace heads the ancient Egyptians used. As you can see, they're very, very different in type.
Yeah.
So if I could give you those.
Certainly.
And then if I put on the heads themselves, exactly where I'd like you to aim for to sort of replicate the kind of damage we saw on the mummy, that will be absolutely tremendous. So take it away.
Give it a go. Right. Okay. I think the second one's done the most damage, I think.
Well, you've got a brilliant aim. So this one was inflicted with
this one?
With that one, that's
Yes.
interesting. And then this one that I thought personally would inflict the most damage hardly seems to have done anything, does it?
No.
That's intriguing.
Contrary to their predictions, the disc mace has been the more lethal implement.
With all the work that you've been doing, do you think that a blow from a mace head could have been the cause of death for our individual?
I have to say that yes, it could. I have to say that nothing that I've looked at so far rules it out as a possibility. We need to maybe look at get some x-rays done, take this to, and you and Joe maybe get some x-rays done, look at the type of wound that I can't see, so the damage that's inside the skull.
Both forensic experiments have been a success. It looks as if the mummy could have been killed in a mace attack. The team now needs real proof to support the theory. The X-ray machine examines the damage. The focus is on the trauma beneath the surface of the skull that can't be seen by the naked eye. The X-ray images will give the team a closer look at the cranial damage to both pigs' heads and the mummy to see if the wounds are consistent with each other. Professor Don Brothwell, a leading paleopathologist, will examine the X-rays. He's an expert in determining cause of death and was a leading investigator for the war crimes tribunals in the former Yugoslavia.
Here we have the results of the X-rays back from the experiments we did on the pig heads with the maces. You can see this one is the globe mace head, the circular one. And the effects on the other side of the disc mace head with the nice fine edge. So very different injuries sustained on each of the pig skulls, and then we've got the actual skull, which also shows this area of damage. So I'd really like your opinions on the sort of comparisons we can see here in terms of the kind of injuries sustained.
I think as far as the pig skulls are concerned, the most damage is in the case of the left one there. There's far more damage I can see in that area, which is the top part of the snout, just where it begins to go into the sort of brain box area. Whereas there's little evidence of any damage on the other one.
Professor Brothwell has identified extensive damage on the pigs' heads.
Bearing that in mind, the damage in the human skull is very modest, and it follows the contour of a part of the frontal sinus system. The air space is inside your frontal bone. Now, had it been a real serious impact injury, I would have expected damage to extend into the other parts of the frontal there.
The damage to the mummy's skull just isn't extensive enough compared to the more dramatic trauma visible on the pig skulls. After all the tests, a mace attack can be ruled out as the cause of death for this mummy. But there's still the mystery of how the injuries did happen.
It's not an example of beheading.
Oh,
it's
right.
not a victim of a mace attack. It wasn't sort of bludgeoned to death. So we need to try and establish exactly how such, quite serious injuries were inflicted on this individual.
To be sure that the team haven't missed anything, Joann and Jill revisit the facts that they've already established about the mummy.
We know that he's male. We know that he's high status, both from the quality of the embalming, but certainly the results of the chemical analysis even show the nature of the hair styling, fixative, applied to his hair. So we know that in life he would have been quite a dandy, quite flash. He would have worn the wigs that they wore in those days, of course. Really marking him out in society, I think, as a high-status individual.
When we look at the possibility that this individual came from Saqqara, which is the burial place of wealthy people, it's going to be a prime place for tomb robbers to target. This person's going to have been buried in all of their finery, necklaces, jewellery, things like that. So tomb robbers are going to want to come in and rip out all of this stuff because they've got to be in and out as quickly as possible. What we've got here from the ancient times is somebody saying that we found this noble mummy of this king equipped like a warrior. A large number of sacred eye amulets and ornaments of gold was at his neck.
It was a real smash and grab raid, wasn't it? Go in, head off, jewellery taken. And I mean, time was of the essence, wasn't it? So they weren't going to hang about.
I mean, they would have had to have done it as quickly as possible to avoid being caught, because obviously the punishment being caught was really severe. You know, we know of examples of impalements, beatings and all sorts. So, you know, they really did have to be expert at getting into these tombs and getting out very quick. So,
well, that would explain both the beheading, so-called, and this blow to the head. So both of which are post-mortem and both of which are certainly not the cause of death.
Yeah.
But even though tomb raiding might explain these injuries, the team is still no closer to establishing how the man actually died. Joann is hoping that leading radiologist Dr. Ian MacLeod's detailed examination of the X-ray results may offer some much-needed answers.
What we've got is the top of the skull there. We've got the eye, and we're just seeing this sort of outline of the nose there. But what really intrigues me about this picture is what's happened to this gentleman's neck. Because here we've got the vertebrae at the top of the neck, and then this little piece here, which is what we call the odontoid peg, the bit that allows the head to rotate. Normally there should be a vertebrae sitting there, but in fact there isn't. It's sitting here. So it's been pushed right back. If I could just put up a normal picture for you. This is an older radiograph, but hopefully we'll sort of show it as what it should look like. And here we've got the same sort of vertebrae coming up. You can just see on the inside there, there's this odontoid peg, and there's the vertebrae where it should be. And you can see very clearly on here.
It's really gone back, hasn't it?
It's pushed it right back.
Would this have been inflicted in life or shortly after death?
And this is an injury that must have occurred before mummification. Once the mummification process had taken place, the skin would have been like leather, and what would have happened if you'd applied this sort of level of force as the thing would have just smashed.
What kind of action could have displaced it like this?
It must have been somehow the head was lifted up and back, almost lifted off, to sort of create that. It's very, very unusual.
So some kind of violent manipulation of the head off the neck. It's almost as if the skull's been lifted off the vertebrae.
It certainly has, in order to allow that vertebrae to be literally physically dislodged over the top of the vertebrae beneath it.
That's really disturbing. This man must have met a very violent death.
And what's interesting, of course, is now having known that, if we go back to the original photograph that you bring in, it starts to make a little bit more sense. Because I noted this strange-looking contortion of the neck. And, you know, with a sort of eye of faith almost, you could imagine a ligature or something around that area of the neck.
Cord or rope or
something of that nature, which has obviously been pulled at great force. It's contorted the neck, and presumably, because it's at the right site, created that injury.
So what we're really saying here is it's quite possible that some sort of cord or ligature was applied around the throat to strangle this individual and pull tight to create this really horrific injury.
Well, that would certainly fit with what we're seeing here.
With some force.
Incredible
this is
force.
Terrible, terrible injury, and what a horrific way to die.
Awful. Absolutely awful.
This has been one of the toughest assignments yet for the mummy investigation team.
This kind of status of mummification, this standard, isn't given to just anyone.
But what we also have is beeswax.
Would he have been so well marked out in society to have him, made himself a target?
You could imagine a ligature which has obviously been pulled at great force.
But with limited evidence and no body to go on, the team has managed to figure out when this man lived, where he came from, his social standing, and they know that he was horrifically strangled to death. Strangulation was not a common method of state execution in Egypt and would be very unlikely in battle, so the mummy investigation team can conclude the mystery man was almost certainly the victim of a brutal murder.
What I found quite emotional and almost humbling was how quickly he became not an object to be measured and looked at, but became a person that you're trying to unravel.
I think the science has really helped to put this individual into some sort of context.
Even if we'd had the complete body, we wouldn't have had any more results. We couldn't have said more than, who he was, where he was from, what the cause of death was.
Is it the kind of random attack, somebody crowding in on this guy to sort of steal the wealth that he must have displayed in life?